The town was shrouded in an eerie silence. At the edge of town, nestled at the end of a weed-choked alley, stood an ancient toy shop. Its once vibrant facade had faded to a dull grey, the paint peeling like scabs. The shop's windows, grimy with years of neglect, offered only a glimpse into the darkness within. For within these walls, among the forgotten toys and shattered dreams, a secret lay dormant, waiting to be unearthed. A young girl, Emily, her eyes bright with curiosity, skipped down the deserted street. The old toy shop, with its air of mystery and decay, beckoned to her like a moth to a flame. As she pushed open the creaking door, a shiver ran down her spine. Rows upon rows of dusty shelves lined the walls, crammed with forgotten toys. And in the farthest corner, shrouded in shadows, sat a porcelain doll named Shampie. Shampie sat upon a dusty shelf, her porcelain skin glowing faintly in the gloom. Her eyes, a startling blue, seemed to follow Emily's every move. Emily cautiously approached the doll, drawn in by an invisible thread of fascination. She reached out a hesitant hand, her fingers brushing against the cold, smooth porcelain. As Emily stared into Shampie's eyes, she felt a strange connection forming. The old shopkeeper, a wizened man, seemed hesitant to part with Shampie. He spoke of the strange occurrences that plagued his shop after her arrival. Objects moved on their own, whispers seemed to emanate from the shadows. He warned Emily of the dangers of owning such a doll, of the darkness that clung to her like a shroud. But Emily, filled with fascination, refused to listen. Ignoring the shopkeeper's warnings, Emily paid for the doll and left the shop. As she stepped back into the sunlight, she felt a strange sense of foreboding. She skipped home, her mind filled with images of tea parties and whispered secrets. Little did she know that her fate and Shampie's were now irrevocably intertwined. And as darkness fell and Emily drifted off to sleep, she felt a cold spot form on her pillow. The night crept in, shrouding Emily's room in an unsettling darkness. Emily, nestled beneath her quilt, tried to ignore the growing unease. She glanced at her bedside table where Shampie sat, bathed in the pale moonlight. The doll's blue eyes, usually so full of life, seemed vacant now. She could have sworn she felt a cold draft, a breath of icy air, brush against her cheek. As the hours ticked by, Emily's fear morphed into a bone-deep exhaustion. Just when she felt her eyelids growing heavy, a sound, soft yet distinct, jolted her awake. It was a giggle, a child's giggle, high-pitched and chillingly familiar. She sat up in bed, her eyes scanning the room, searching for the source of the sound. The giggle came again, closer this time, and Emily could have sworn she felt a cold hand brush against her ankle. Frozen in place, her hand still clutching the doorknob, Emily slowly turned her head towards the source of the sound. There, sitting on her bedside table, bathed in the silver glow of the moon, was Shampie. The doll's head, which had been facing straight ahead just moments before, was now turned towards her. The smile, that unsettling, painted-on smile, seemed to have widened. And in her eyes, Emily saw something that chilled her to the core: recognition. The nights that followed were a blur of terror for Emily. Every time she closed her eyes, she was plagued by visions of Shampie. The giggling, once sporadic, became a constant torment. Objects moved on their own, shadows danced at the edge of her vision. Her parents, at first dismissive of her claims, grew increasingly concerned as they witnessed their daughter's rapid decline. One night, as Emily lay in bed, she felt a cold hand close around her wrist. Shampie, her porcelain face illuminated by the pale moonlight, stared back at her. The doll's lips moved, forming words that seemed to slither into Emily's mind. "We are bound together now," Shampie whispered, her voice a chilling rasp. And as darkness closed in, swallowing her whole, Emily knew with a certainty that chilled her to the core that there was no escape. Days turned into weeks, each one a torment for young Emily. The nightmare had seeped into every aspect of her life, casting a dark pall over her once joyful world. She withdrew into herself, becoming a shadow of her former self, her laughter silenced, her eyes haunted by a fear that no one else could comprehend. Desperate for solace, Emily sought refuge in the one place where she had always found comfort: the warm embrace of her grandmother. Her grandmother, a woman of quiet strength and unwavering faith, listened patiently as Emily, her voice trembling with unshed tears, poured out her heart, recounting the terrifying events that had plagued her ever since Shampie's arrival. Her grandmother, wise in the ways of the world and the unseen forces that lay beyond human understanding, didn't dismiss Emily's fears as childish fancy or overactive imagination. She recognized the truth in Emily's words, the chilling reality that had woven its way into their lives. She knew that Shampie was no ordinary doll. It was a vessel, a conduit for something dark and ancient, something that fed on fear and despair. Holding Emily close, her wrinkled hand gently stroking the young girl's hair, her grandmother whispered words of comfort and reassurance. She spoke of the power of faith, of the light that resided within every human heart, a light that no darkness could extinguish. She promised Emily that they would find a way to break the curse, to free her from the clutches of the evil that had taken root in their home. Together, Emily and her grandmother delved into ancient texts, their fingers tracing the faded ink of forgotten lore. They sought answers in whispered traditions and rituals practiced by those who walked the line between the mortal world and the supernatural. Finally, they stumbled upon a glimmer of hope, a ritual said to banish even the most persistent of entities. It was a desperate measure, fraught with risk, but Emily clung to it with tenacity. Emily repeated the words her grandmother whispered, her voice blending with the crackling flames. The air crackled with energy, shadows writhing as if sensing the impending confrontation. The heart of the ritual centered around the fireplace. Flames roared, fueled by ancient woods and herbs, their light dancing across the room, casting flickering shadows that seemed to writhe and pulse with an unseen energy. The air itself crackled, thick with the scent of myrrh and frankincense, a blend of aromas both sacred and unsettling. Emily, her small hand clasped tightly in her grandmother's, watched as the flames climbed higher, their tongues licking at the iron grate with hungry intensity. Her heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic rhythm mirroring the dance of the fire. Fear, cold and clammy, clung to her, but it was overshadowed by a desperate hope, a fervent prayer for release from the nightmare that had ensnared her. In her other hand, clutched so tightly her knuckles had turned white, Emily held Shampie. The porcelain doll felt strangely warm against her palm, its painted smile mocking her in the flickering light. Her grandmother had explained that the fire, a symbol of purification and renewal, would sever the bond, consuming the evil that clung to the doll, setting her free from its grasp. Taking a deep breath, Emily stepped closer to the inferno. The heat washed over her, a tangible wave of energy that sent shivers down her spine. Her grandmother, her voice steady and strong, uttered the final words of the incantation, her voice resonating with an ancient power that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. And then, with a decisiveness that surprised even herself, Emily hurled Shampie into the heart of the fire. The doll landed amidst the flames with a dull thud. For a moment there was silence, a silence so profound it seemed to suck the air from Emily's lungs. Then a plume of black smoke erupted from the hearth, swirling upwards like a living thing, twisting and contorting into grotesque shapes that danced across the ceiling. The air crackled with a sudden surge of energy, and a wave of heat, more intense than before, washed over Emily and her grandmother, forcing them to shield their faces. And then it began. A laugh, high-pitched and filled with a chilling delight, echoed through the room. It wasn't Emily's laughter, nor was it the sound of her grandmother's voice. It was Shampie's laugh, amplified 100-fold, distorted and grotesque, as if it emanated from the very heart of the inferno. Emily's blood ran cold. The fire, instead of consuming the doll, seemed to empower it, fueling its malevolence, amplifying its terrifying presence. The shadows in the room danced more violently now, twisting and contorting, taking on the shapes of clawed hands and leering faces, their silent laughter echoing Shampie's chilling glee. Panic welled up inside Emily, threatening to overwhelm her. The ritual, the fire, the incantations, they had all failed. They had only served to enrage the entity that held them captive, to tighten its grip on their world. Her grandmother, her face pale but resolute, drew Emily close, shielding her with her own body as the temperature in the room soared, the air growing thick and heavy, making it difficult to breathe. As quickly as it had begun, the laughter subsided. The shadows, their dance growing erratic, flickered and receded, shrinking back into the corners of the room. The flames, their intensity waning, died down, leaving behind a bed of glowing embers and a thick pall of smoke that stung Emily's eyes and scratched at the back of her throat. A heavy silence descended, broken only by the crackling of the cooling embers and the frantic beating of Emily's heart. She clung to her grandmother, her small body trembling, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. The ritual had failed. The entity, whatever it was that clung to Shampie, remained. Despair threatened to engulf Emily, but her grandmother, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hand, refused to let it take root. "It's not over yet, Emily," she whispered, her voice hoarse but resolute. "There's still a chance." Cautiously, her grandmother approached the fireplace. The heat, though diminished, still radiated outwards, forcing her to shield her face with her sleeve. Bending down, she peered into the heart of the cooling embers. "What is it, Grandma?" Emily whispered, her voice trembling. Her grandmother didn't answer. Instead, she reached into the ashes, her hand disappearing into the darkness. Emily held her breath, her gaze fixed on her grandmother's hand, waiting, hoping, praying, and then her grandmother's hand emerged, her fingers curled around a small, blackened object. The object glinted in the firelight, its surface charred and blackened. It was Shampie, or rather, what remained of her. The fire had consumed her porcelain skin, her once vibrant dress, leaving behind a grotesque effigy of twisted metal and ash. But even in its ruined state, an unsettling aura clung to the doll, a palpable sense of malice that sent shivers down Emily's spine. Her grandmother held the charred doll at arm's length, whispering, "It's gone. Emily, the entity, the darkness, it's gone." The fire, it purged it, consumed it. Emily stared at the remains of the doll, a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. The house, once filled with an oppressive presence, was now strangely silent. Her grandmother carried the remains of Shampie outside to the old well at the back of the property. With a finality that sent a shiver down Emily's spine, her grandmother dropped the doll into the darkness. A soft thud echoed from the depths, followed by an eerie silence. Emily never saw Shampie again. The nightmares ceased. The laughter that had haunted her dreams faded into memory, but deep within the earth, at the bottom of the old well, amidst the cold stones and stagnant water, something stirred. A faint glow emanated from the charred remains of a porcelain doll, waiting, watching.